A question I get asked an awful lot is why did armies in the 18th century and even the 19th century and 17th century stand facing in lines opposing one another? And that's never an easiest question in the world to answer. But you have to go back to the time and you have to go back to the technology and what was known as linear warfare. And linear warfare is essentially just that. You have lines of men facing against each other. But the technique involved is what's known as volley fire. Now, volley fire is very old. It's a much older technology than people think it. Much older technique. The word volley, basically volley fire, is essentially you're firing en masse.
Fire!
As a group, you see it in reenactments, you see it in movies. Make ready, present, fire. And all the men fire at once. That's the discipline. You want that line of fire at once. Well, it goes back as far as the earliest known is, it's a Latin term. The word volley the original was, depending on how you pronounce it, it's either volare or volare. And it simply means to fly. And that refers to showering your enemy with arrows. That's kind of what we're referring to as far as archers go. The French word is voler, much more close to volley. Same thing, same exact meaning, to fly. Both mean the exact same. So, where did they get that from? Well, going back to medieval times, as far back as, again, early Europe, Asia, armies would line up facing each other, and archers would shoot arrows or loose arrows into the air at their enemy. And a great movie to actually watch is, ignore the rest of the historical inaccuracies in it, but in the Battle of Stirling, in Braveheart, you got to actually see an excellent demonstration of arrows in flight. It's the only time, as far as I know, at least the first time, that was done in a film. And they actually did it with compressed air cannons, and they launched arrows in a safe direction so they could film them. But you got to see arrows in flight, en masse, just like that. And that's exactly how it would have looked. Hundreds of arrows coming back down to earth on your enemy, and just anything exposed that was getting hit was going to get put down. And there's kind of a concept people don't understand. When you're shooting at your enemy, this is a thing you see a lot of getting tied up with when it comes to getting into the firearms era, smoothbore muskets. People confuse the terms accurate and effective. You'll always hear, well, these muskets were not effective out past a certain yard. No. The term effective and accurate are two very different, they shouldn't be equated to each other. And the reason why is, okay, again, line of men, shooting at each other with smoothbore muskets. The British Brown Bess musket, 75 caliber, the ball's roughly 69 caliber because they use that paper cartridge. Smaller ball, you could get more shots out of it before the gun would get so fouled you couldn't load anymore. So what would happen is okay, a 69 caliber round ball is over an ounce of lead. It's almost 3/4 of a diameter. I can tell you right now, while that gun may not be accurate at 100 yards, it is certainly effective at 100 yards. Meaning, I may not hit the soldier I was aiming at, and yes, they did aim. Ready, if you look at the drilling manuals of all the armies, they aimed. They were picking targets. They were, they may not be aiming real well. Again, line of men, thousands deep. Thousands in line, hundreds of men in front of them, opposing them. Okay, that gun at 50 yards, they're fairly accurate. You can pretty much hit the man-sized target in front of you at 50 yards. 100 yards, probably not. But that doesn't mean that ball was not effective. I may not hit the person I was aiming at. I may hit the man next to him, on one side or the other, maybe even two men over next to him. But if a 69 caliber round ball hits that man, it may not be in the vitals, it may not be in the body, maybe arm, maybe leg. That man is effectively out of action. So again, your thing is, accuracy versus effectiveness. And that's always confused people. So again, the biggest thing is, and you see, actually I will say the movie The Patriot, again, ignore most of the things. What you will see is they actually did show the size and vastness of the armies. And even some of the battle scenes like Camden where they showed how close they really were. So again, what was the whole point of volley fire and firing that way? Why did they do this? The simple answer is they wanted to shoot as many of the enemy as possible. They didn't necessarily kill them. It was the fact that it was a different time. The armies were more considered gentlemanly. But at the same time, if you had to fight, the answer was you're still putting down, the concept is putting down as many of your enemies as possible. You do this with as much firepower. Again, strength in numbers. If I have 100 guys with muskets versus their 100 guys with muskets, you get as close as you can to them before you open fire, because you want to be as effective as possible. Of course, the British, the whole answer of the British, and pretty much you see it even with the Hessians, is to get to the bayonet charge. Fire 3 rounds a minute if possible, switch to the bayonet, do a bayonet charge. Drive your enemy from the field. That's the main goal, is to drive your enemy from the field. You'll see in the battles, you'll hear the terms taking the field. That's what it is. You want your enemy to break and run. And it happened over and over again throughout those centuries of warfare. Your army breaks and runs. It happened in so many battles. It happened versus the French. It happened with the French. The Continental Army at Camden. It happened over and over again. It happened somewhat to the British. Battle of Carillon, 1758, where 3,000 plus Frenchmen defeated an army of 15,000 British. Although the British were so much better disciplined, but they did come up against Battle of Bunker Hill, technically Breed's Hill, where Howe basically just kept running lines of men against the Americans, against the Continentals. And Israel Putnam said, that's for the famous, do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes. That was wait until they are as close as you can and then fire, maximizing the volley fire that you can use against your opponent. The British, even though they won that battle, suffered horrendous losses there. Same with Utah Springs. But that was a technology. Now, why did it end? Why did it end? How did this, that lasted for centuries, end? Why? Simply put, the technology got so good of armies killing other armies and men that to do this was foolhardy. The Native Americans saw that for years. We're not standing in line here. We're going to hide behind trees. And then the other army said, wait a second, this is where Robert Rogers, Francis Marion, these other, and the French had their own as well. The light infantry, during the American Revolution, you had You had all these light infantry that was put together. Daniel Morgan, why not use the riflemen? And believe it or not, Washington did not like them. Even Washington did not like the idea of knocking off officers like this. Taking out, it was not considered gentlemanly. It was not considered. You just didn't do that. Were they effective? Extremely effective. Everybody's were. You get in close with a rifle at 100 yards, they're picking off. A lot of it wasn't so much, yes, they were taking out officers, but they were taking out gun crews. They were taking out artillery crews. But why did that all stop? Because you started seeing a development in the Civil War. Rifled muskets. You could not put armies against each other at 50 yards anymore. It happened. It happened on several occasions. Skirmishes, battles. The Battle of Little Round Top during the Civil War. The 20th Maine was just devastating the Confederates that just kept being marched against them. They were wiping them out time and time again, and they just kept sending more men. And it ended when the 20th Maine was out of ammunition, and they did a bayonet charge down the hill and drove the Confederate army back. That was what finally stopped that. But it was the fact that you now had firearms, rifled muskets, that at 300 yards could achieve what you were doing at 50 yards a century before. The final nail in the coffin of linear warfare and volley fire and men standing like this, doing this, was World War I. The machine gun. The machine gun put an end to this. The machine gun and its rate of fire meant you could not stand facing an enemy. You were done. And unfortunately, you had what happened during World War I, trench warfare. You had men try in line in large numbers to cross large pieces of ground against opposing enemies armed with machine guns. And what happened? They were devastated. The casualties were enormous. The Gallipoli campaign. When you have battles and campaigns of that staggering number, where that many thousands of men die in a battle, and it just kept going. It went on for, Gallipoli was 1916. You had just thousands upon thousands of men. Things had to change. And by the end of World War I, linear warfare, men running like that, it was done. You could no longer sustain an army. Your armies were getting wiped out just by attrition alone. And that's what it was. It was attrition. You were losing, and that's essentially what volley fire and all military is to that anyways. It's attrition. This was no more than my guys shooting at your guys, even with smoothbore muskets, and some of your innovations during that time period. How do you make more muskets more effective? Not necessarily accurate. Again, don't confuse accuracy and effectiveness. How do you make them more effective? Well, you supplement your 69 caliber or whatever, let's say 64 caliber ball with 3 of those guys, 30 through 32, 33 caliber smaller lead round balls, which became known as buck and ball, loaded in a simple paper cartridge, just like you were loading these. And all 4 of these would be fired at the enemy in one shot. Again, you may not kill your opposing enemy, your opposing soldier with these, but you can damn well better believe he's not going to get back up. He is going to be in trouble. He's going to be shot. He's going to be in serious need of medical attention. He is no longer a viable combatant to your opponent. He is now out of the fight. He is now taking up a space on the ground where he should be in line fighting you. He is now effectively out of action. That's the goal. To simply put your opponent out of action with as much force, strength, and numbers as possible. And that is how you work with volley fire, and why volley fire was used for so long throughout history. And with that being said, have a good day.